Greetings, environmentalist, and we're going to finish up the biome unit. And remember, we'll have a quiz over biomes when you get to class. So let's think about all the biomes you've learned thus far. And one of the common themes that changed the type of biome that could exist was the amount of water that was seen in precipitation in that biome. Water is one of the basic necessities for the biological life as we know it on planet Earth. One of the things that's important to note is not all water is the same. While that may seem like an obvious duh moment, the chemistry of the water is very important to what kind of animals, plants, and chemistry can allow for certain types of reactions to occur, which can either be a limiting factor or an empowerment factor for life in that water system. Now, water systems can be divided into three major categories. One is called marine, one is called brackish, and one is called freshwater. Chemical reactions such as dissolved oxygen, nutrients, any kind of conductivity, which is related to salt content and the electrical currents in that salt content, how much energy is in the water, all of these things impact how chemistry works in a water system. While that doesn't seem like such a big deal, let me give you a simplistic example of how salinity impacts water. So when you're looking at sea creatures that make their own shells, those are invertebrates. For the most part, they're the only things that don't have backbones. Invertebrates are organisms that don't have backbones, but they create their own shells. Not all invertebrates have a shelly outer coating, but starting around 550-ish million years ago, animals found a way to start developing shells, which led to a remarkable evolution very quickly of shelly-type animals. Most shelly animals, especially those in the ocean, require some level of salinity. That's what we would call marine. Most ocean salinity is over 30 parts per thousand, but usually somewhere between 34 and 36 parts per thousand. So what you're looking at is the closer you get to the poles, the salinity actually drops. At the equator, where we have high evaporation, there's more salt content in the water. So salinity is very important for chemical reactions to occur in a marine environment. If you have a brackish environment, that's going to be one with about 0.5 parts per thousand up to about 30 parts per thousand of salt content. So you can imagine that your most saline areas for a brackish water environment would come from where rivers and oceans meet at estuaries. We'll talk about them shortly. However, they're lacustrine, known as lake environments, that can be extremely salty. So brackish water is anything that's not fresh but doesn't meet the definition of marine. So what is freshwater? Freshwater should be what you refer to as aquatic. So when I hear people say aquatic applies to everything in water, it's not true. Aquatic aquatic ecology is really looking at rivers, lakes, streams, freshwater bodies. Now again, rivers and lakes can be very saline. I can give you an example of one here locally in Texas that is extremely salty. Parts of the Brazos River are very saline because the geology has a lot of evaporite deposits from geologic past, especially from the late Paleozoic. Another reason that they are is they will pick up dissolved solids from rock formations or from groundwater influence and mix with a stream or a tributary. An example of that would be Sulphur Creek that feeds into the Lampasas River in the city of Lampasas. So that's a very high salty content river system. And when I worked for the Brazos River Authority, it was definitely what you would call enough to be marine status, or certainly brackish. And so you look at that, and there are different river systems and lake systems that may have an anomaly, but for the most part, freshwater is going to be below 0.5 parts per thousand. And so the animals that live in an aquatic environment can't tolerate high volumes of salt. So when you're looking at a brackish system like an estuary where you get tides that are coming in from the ocean blending with fresh water where tributaries feed into the ocean, some very unique situations can occur where you can get freshwater organisms meet saltwater organisms. And there can be a variety of reasons for that. So we're going to look at a lake right now. Just so you know, lakes are called lacustrine environments, geologically speaking, and even in ecology they are as well. But a lake or a lacustrine system is broken into three major zones. The littoral zone is the shallowest part of the water system at the edges of a lake. So you'll see both emergent vegetation and deeper dwelling plants that are rooted to the bottom. So they can't be that deep. They're looking at feet deep, but not tens of feet deep. But this is by far, test question, the absolute most productive area of a lake. And here's why. Because it's receiving all the nutrients that run off from tributaries and run off from rain, stormwater that is, into that lake system. So here's why that's important. So if you kind of follow my mouse, let's say this is Waco without all of the mountains, right? So it rains and we're picking up rainwater that washes over leaking septic tanks or freshly applied manure on a hay pasture, or a concentrated animal feeding operation where water has picked up these nutrients like ammonia, nitrogen, nitrates, sulfates, and so forth, phosphorus, and they're washing into this part. So you're going to have a lot of nutrients, that's a lot of green. If you have a healthy riparian zone, and riparian is going to be the plant life that exists at the edge of the ground into the river or lake itself, that can help absorb some of those nutrients and help prevent nutrient overloading to that lake system. So what kind of plants would you expect to see in the littoral zone? You'd expect to see things that like wetlands, for example, cattails and bulrush and algae and even lily pads and things of that nature. So this is going to be an important part of an aquatic system because this will be a breeding ground and also a larval stage for many animals that will transition from a larval stage such as a tadpole into a frog in their adult stage. Remember, the littoral zone is the most productive part of a lake. This would be classic littoral. You can see the edge of this lake system, shallow water right in here. You can see some emergent plants, some deep-rooted plants here, and then some wetlands plants along the perimeter right here. So if you have a healthy littoral zone, that can be important to the health of the overall ability of that lake to handle nutrient loading. The limnetic zone is the section that's away from the edge, and it's the deeper water section of a lake. So you can get sunlight in the limnetic zone until it disappears, and when it disappears, that's going to be an important part of a lake that we'll get to in just a minute. In this section, you will have photosynthesis, so there'll be microscopic and even macroscopic vegetation that usually is free-floating that can allow for aquatic animals and plants to feed on. So you'll see zooplankton, very large fish. You'll see less rooted vegetation, but floating vegetation is what you'll see in floating zooplankton type food resources. The limnetic zone is going to be the area, the middle of the lake. So it's going to be the deeper area, bigger fish. So if you have a fish finder for fishing, that would be why, because you're looking for zones where the limnetic zone will have some of your larger game fish. All right, when you think of the profundal zone, even the name sounds bad, doesn't it? Profundal. The profundal zone is the deepest area of the lake at the very bottom of the lake. It's beneath the limnetic zone where zero photosynthesis can occur. So there's this boundary marker, you'll see it here in a dotted line right there. That particular line represents a place where sunlight no longer penetrates. So that's called a thermocline, by the way. Thermo for heat, and cline is where it readily the temperature dramatically changes and sunlight doesn't penetrate beneath there. What will you see living there? This is where all your decomposers live. So the next time you have catfish, I'd like you to think about profundal zone and realize that this is where the decomposers are breaking down the nutrients, the dead animals, they're eating on the yucky part of the lake. So mainly bacteria live down there. It's very anoxic and very gross. So if you've ever done lake diving and been to the deepest part of a lake, then like at a lake with a dam, then you probably experienced the profundal zone. What's an important element of the profundal zone is this. Those nutrients can't stay there indefinitely. So when temperature changes occur at specific times of the year in fall and spring, it'll cause the profundal zone to scoop up and move to the top and bring that clean water down here. So thinking about that, I'd like just to point out and kind of jump ahead for this semester. Water treatment plants like we have in the city of Waco have typically multiple intake lines at different depths from here, 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 and here. You may be wondering, why would they have 5 of these things and one at the profundal zone? Let's say we get a lake turnover and we get a need to have water from a deeper part of the lake. Or let's say that we get stormwater runoff and we got a bunch of log materials way up here in the littoral and the top of the limnetic. We're going to have to pull from deeper water in order to be able to have water that we can treat without a lot of debris. So a profundal zone is absolutely necessary because you have to decompose all the dead stuff, but it is the yucky, icky part of a lake. When we think about the profundal zone and the thermocline, when the thermocline shifts temperatures, it's going to happen during the fall and spring months where the temperatures changes at that thermocline, allowing for a lake turnover to occur. This will bring the nutrients up from the profundal zone to the littoral zone and to the top of the lake. So this happens in most every lake naturally. So you may be going, well, I heard the water in Waco tastes horrible. Well, it used to. That's because we didn't have a dissolved air flotation plant. For those of you in lab, you may get the opportunity to go see this thing. So it's really awesome thing of how we deal with that. But let me tell you why Waco, specifically Lake Waco, does not have a turnover as most lakes will. It used to turn over in the past, but we installed some aerators. So an aerator would be something that spins water that makes bubbles and moves oxygen throughout the water. Right now, there's one functioning at the Waco Dam, and that helps turn the water over in the deepest part of the lake, which is just at the dam where the dam wall is. So we do this to try to limit the amount of turnovers. Is that a good or a bad thing? I'll let you think on that. But for drinking water, it's been absolutely necessary for us to have water that's treatable, that doesn't cost just an excessive fortune to remove all of that material. So by itself, adding the aerator may not be such a problem, but Lake Waco has a unique set of circumstances because it is overloaded with nutrients from a variety of sources, nutrients being phosphorus, ammonia, and nitrates and sulfates. So let's look at a couple of what freshwater systems and then even brackish systems that are essential for helping clean water as it comes into a lake environment. Freshwater wetlands have a variety of different names. There's about 10 different types, but essentially a wetlands is an area covered by shallow water for at least part of the year. And wetlands are known to be very important because, first of all, they have aquatic plants. Plants will utilize nutrients that are in the water. For example, if it rains a bunch, we get stormwater runoff. These plants can actually utilize the nutrients to grow. So that reduces nutrient loading to a lake or to other river systems and ultimately to the ocean. Also, the soil is usually anaerobic, meaning there's no oxygen there, very high in organic content, clay-based material, allowing for water to saturate those soils and stay wet. which allows for a breeding ground for a variety of different organisms, including migratory birds, various different types of invertebrates, and then, of course, predators that will feed on these animals that come to a wetlands. So you can see a lot of variety of life in a wetlands. We have one that's in Waco, Texas. But let me caution you that it's not a natural wetlands. It is a constructed, man-made wetlands. It was actually made as a mitigation project when the city of Waco requested a permit change to raise the level of the lake by 7 feet. While that doesn't sound like much, the acre feet that increased the volume of water in the lake was substantial. An acre foot is simply an acre of land that would be filled with a foot of water. So water is sold by the acre foot, and as the population continues to grow and industry continues to move to Waco, the demand for water over the next 50 years is substantial. So in 2001, the Waco Wetlands was established. It started off with a nursery, and I don't mean like a child nursery, I mean like a plant nursery. I was there to help with that volunteering day, and what we did was take plants that were obtained from a variety of sources throughout Texas and other locations, transplanted them into this nursery that still exists at the wetlands today to try to grow the plants that would then be put in a variety of the different cells that makes up the Waco wetlands. So water is diverted from the North Bosque River, and it flows downstream. And as it gets diverted, about 20-25% can be put through the Waco wetlands at any given time when it's pumping water. And all the water is gravity fed, so where it feeds into the intake cell, it just is gradually working downhill at a slight dip. Later on, this building was built with some federal money, and it's the education building, and a lot of science and education programs occur there. One of the things that the wetlands has to do is manage their aquatic plants. Well, cattails may be a good freshwater aquatic plant, but we have too much of it at the Waco wetlands. This used to be farmland, and cattails lay dormant in the soil for 25 plus years. So when we made wetlands out of it, constructed wetlands, those cattails took root and overtook the system. So occasionally we get volunteers out there, like from MCC, and help pull the cattails and plant other types of aquatic plants we want more of, such as bulrush. So what is an estuary, and how does it differ from a wetlands? An estuary is where fresh water meets salt water. Typically they are where freshwater tributaries feed into the ocean. So at high tide, that water can mix and become very brackish. These are important breeding grounds for some aquatic animals and certainly marine animals. But only certain things can survive there depending on the degree of salinity that exists. Not all plants can survive a saline environment at all. So as the closer you get to the shoreline, the more marine-like your plants will be. This is just a general look at various different types of estuaries. Some are man-made, where we've actually constructed a place for water to flow in and out for high and low tide. But typically, this is more the view of what an estuary looks like. On occasion, we get some visitors that come in from either an aquatic system like a river otter, or you could get something like manatees. And manatees are marine creatures, mammals, and they come into the estuary to breed. So in estuaries, there's really two major groups of estuaries. There are saltwater marshes in temperate areas, and then there are mangrove swamps in tropical areas. So understand that an estuary absolutely is like a wetlands, but to the ocean. So it will absorb nutrients. It allows great concentrations of light for photosynthesis. There are a variety of different plants and a species, depending on where you are and what type of estuary, a variety of trees. But the key thing is it's a breeding ground for fish and other types of organisms. So it's a highly biologically diverse environment. So Estuaries don't have a huge amount of economic value to the land. In other words, the dollar value of the land is not that high. And you could look at why people might say, oh, that's an ugly set of trees. Well, these are mangroves. So what's a mangrove? These are found in tropical estuaries. Mangroves are essential to any coral reef environment in the ocean in a tropical area, latitude. Notice that they have roots that are open that feed into the ground. In other words, there's not just one root system. This is characteristic of allowing for habitat, nutrient absorption, also soil anchoring. So mangroves tend to be the first thing that get uprooted when some kind of construction, tourism, or something like that, human influence to the coastline comes in. They are essential for the productivity of the biological life, and also, I might add, the environmental health of what's in the ocean nearby the shore. So that brings me to coral reefs. Coral reefs are found in tropical locations at latitudes that are between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. So basically, they're made out of CaCO3. That's something you should know for a test. Ca stands for calcium. CO3 stands for carbonate. So calcium carbonate, otherwise known as limestone. So they're very, very picky, corals are, about their temperature. They can live in waters from about 68 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. They do require salt. So not all corals can grow in waters that are low saline. Matter of fact, some of the most salty waters in the world produce some of the most vibrant corals in coral reef systems, which also include things like sponges and other types of organisms. It is unfortunate for us that coral reefs are habitat for 30 to 50% of species that have become endangered in this specific biome that's so remarkable. Many of them are used for economic gain and pharmaceutical and medicine-related purposes. Where you see the red dots in this diagram, that's the locations of coral reefs around the world. So they're very, very, very specific. Don't confuse deep water corals that can exist at the bottom of the ocean with the types of corals that require photosynthesis. So those types of corals at the bottom of the ocean deal with heat and nutrients that come from things like deep sea vents known as black smokers. So let's take a look at this particular coral reef. And I'm going to say, look at this one. This is in the Caribbean. This is the same basic area about 10 or so years later. Now, you compare this to this, this to this. Now, the obvious thing is that this is all white and bleached out. You still see some aquatic fish there. I want to tell you that both of these are in serious trouble. So let's look at the environment here. You may be looking at the healthy picture on the left and going, well, it's kind of icky colors. That's your typical coral reef colors. Most of the color in a coral reef comes from sponges, but that kind of greenish brown color is very characteristic of any coral reef that you may see in blue water, meaning salt water. However, certain corals are very vibrant and they need very high salt content to typically do that. So when you see a lot of fish, you see diversity of life forms, you can see a variety of corals in that environment. That's a healthy system. Also notice that the water is very clear. Now let's look at this. The water immediately is turbid and cloudy. That's going to be a problem for corals because they can't photosynthesize well. So if they're not photosynthesizing, they're going to lose their pigmentation that photosynthesize the algae in there, and they're going to die. That's why they're turning white. So these are living, these are dead. These have been completely bleached out. So essentially they're just limestone carbonate, calcium carbonate based corals. So if they get embedded in the rock record, they'll end up as fossils. But right now they're just dead coral at the bottom of the shallow Caribbean. Let's look at a healthy versus an unhealthy coral here. On the left, you see a brain coral. They're called brain corals because they look just like brains, right? Some are very small, some are huge, like bigger than 5 feet in diameter. So a brain coral is just a type of coral. Many corals are named after what they look like in life, like they're staghorn, elkhorn, they're star corals. There's a variety of different corals. This is a brain coral. So this is a healthy brain coral. This is an unhealthy brain coral. If you see this black band around here, that's called black banding disease. So what's happened is it's gotten some kind of pathogen and it's eaten away all the coral, living coral tissue here, and is slowly eating its way down through the remainder of that brain coral, which it will kill. So where does the source of the pathogen come from? Studies have indicated that some of these can be anthropogenic or human-induced causes, such as pollution from septic or porta potties, from leaking boats that may have liquid waste of organics. It can come from runoff from the land. Needless to say, Caribbean corals are in trouble from things like black banding disease. So that's it for biomes. Come back next time as we start to learn about endangered species. But remember, every biome has a specific characteristic, and biomes are simply these unique environments that have ecosystems that are unique to their latitude, their temperature, their precipitation. So there's the variety varies based on the conditions that are set at hand. I will see you soon and talk to you later. Bye.